Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you a heartwarming and transformative journey about William Callahan, a billionaire CEO who spent years perfecting his image and chasing success. But everything changes when a little girl, Emma, challenges him with a simple, yet profound question. Why did you forget her? This encounter forces William to confront the past he left behind and the family he abandoned in pursuit of fame. Join us as we explore the lessons he learns about love, truth, and the importance of human connections. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and start the story today. It was a cold winter evening when I found myself sitting at the grand signing table in the middle of a lavish ballroom, surrounded by fans who had come to witness what was supposed to be the pinnacle of my career. The room was filled with the sweet fragrance of expensive cologne and champagne, a constant reminder of the success I had achieved. Everything was as it should be, perfect. The marble pillars, draped in gold banners with my name printed across them, sparkled under the chandelier light. This was the kind of event I had long imagined, the kind that proved to the world I had made it. The Callahan legacy, my autobiography, had just become a bestseller. I had carefully crafted every word, every sentence to showcase my rise from nothing to something, the kind of story everyone loves. The underdog turned triumph. I had spent years perfecting my public image. Every handshake, every interview, every decision had been made with one thing in mind: to get to this moment. This book signing was not just an event, it was a celebration of all the struggles I had overcome, of the risks I had taken, and the rewards I had earned. People adored my story. They connected with it. I was no longer just a businessman. I was a symbol of possibility, a living proof that anyone could make it if they worked hard enough. I had just signed my 100th book when a voice cut through the hum of conversation. A voice so small yet filled with clarity. "Sir, you forgot to put mommy in your book." I barely looked up at first. It wasn't unusual for children to be at these kinds of events. Maybe it was just a playful comment, an innocent attempt to get my attention. But when I finally did look up, I found that the voice belonged not to a mother or a doting fan, but to a little girl standing by the table. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Her dark curls slightly frizzy from the humid air, a serious look on her face. Her hands gripped the book as though it were a treasure. Her eyes were wide, expectant, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I let out a short breath, more amused than anything. "Did I now?" I said, leaning back in my chair, trying to keep my tone light. "And who might your mother be?" The girl tilted her head, and for a moment, I thought she was going to give me some elaborate story about a family member who felt left out. Instead, her response came as a shock to me. "She's the part you left out." That stopped me. It wasn't just her words, but the weight behind them. It wasn't the kind of accusation a child typically made. Certainly not one at a book signing. There was no hesitation in her voice, no sense of uncertainty. She was sure. I could feel my breath catch in my chest, and I suddenly became aware of the stillness that had settled over the room. People were watching. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, their curiosity palpable. I rested my forearms on the table, keeping my tone casual, but inside, I was anything but. "What makes you think your mom should be in my book?" I asked, hoping to deflect, to maintain control. The little girl, unfazed, lifted her copy of the book. She flipped it open and tapped a tiny finger against the dedication page, the one where I had written a short note to those who had supported me. "For those who stood by me," she read aloud, her voice steady. "Because you said this, and you forgot her." My heart skipped a beat. The room had grown even quieter, and I could sense the stir of murmurs from the crowd, their whispers filling the air. There was no turning back now. The moment had become larger than I had anticipated. I swallowed, trying to maintain composure. "That's quite an accusation," I said, keeping my voice neutral, though the unease was starting to settle in. "It's not an accusation," she replied calmly. "It's the truth." Her certainty was disarming. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I realized that this moment was something far beyond what I had expected. The story I had so carefully curated, the image I had so meticulously built, was now being questioned by a child. I wanted to respond, to say something that would deflect. But I was struck silent by the weight of her words. Before I could find the right response, a woman in an event staff uniform approached. She gently rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Sweetheart, let's not disturb Mr. Callahan." But the girl shrugged off the woman's touch, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm not disturbing him. I'm just telling him what he forgot." And with that, just as quickly as she had appeared, she turned and walked away, her small frame disappearing into the crowd. The event resumed, but I hardly noticed the rest of the night. I signed books, smiled for photos, answered questions, but my mind was fixed on one thing: that little girl's certainty. Her insistence that I had forgotten someone important in my story. I should have brushed it off. It was just a child, after all, and kids say all sorts of things. But something about the encounter gnawed at me. Later, as I sat in the backseat of my car, staring out at the city lights streaking past, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment meant more than I had realized. And so, I made a call to my assistant. "Mark, find out about Emma Davis," I said, my voice a little more urgent than I intended. "I need to know who her mother is. Look into it." The phone line crackled before Mark responded. "You want me to look into the girl? The one from the signing?" "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of my words. "Just find out who her mother is." The days that followed were filled with a dull restlessness I couldn't shake. I spent hours at my desk, but my mind kept wandering back to that moment with Emma. I had seen thousands of fans, heard hundreds of praises about my book, but none of them had impacted me the way that little girl's words had. "You forgot her." She didn't just challenge the accuracy of my story, she pointed to something deeper. Something I had long buried. A part of my life that I had tried to leave behind. The next morning, I called Mark. "I need answers, and I need them now," I said, my voice sharp. I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't intrigued, and maybe even unsettled, by what Emma had said. There was a history I hadn't acknowledged, and now it felt impossible to ignore. Mark's voice was low on the other end of the line. "I'm on it. I'll get back to you soon." I tried to carry on with my usual routine. Meetings, emails, calls. The noise of the corporate world was always there. But today, it felt distant. Every few minutes, I found myself staring out of the window, thoughts drifting back to Sarah Davis. Emma's mother. Who was she? Why had I forgotten her? The memories were fragmented, distant, but I knew there was more to the story than I had been willing to admit. Sarah wasn't just a part of my past. She was a person who had once meant something to me. As I waited for Mark's findings, I couldn't help but recall the days I had spent with Sarah. The passion we had shared before ambition had driven me away. We had been inseparable for a time. Even when my career was just beginning, I had once believed that love and success couldn't coexist, that the sacrifice of my personal life was necessary for the world I was building. But as I sat in my office, the walls closing in, I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. It was late in the afternoon when Mark finally called back. "I've got something," he said, his voice tinged with the kind of tone I knew meant something significant was about to be revealed. I sat up straighter. "Go ahead." The name's Sarah Davis, also known as Sarah Monroe. She's living in a small town now. Has been for years. A quiet life. No scandal. No drama. Just a small bookstore with a modest living. And get this, no record of a father for Emma. It's just her and Sarah. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Monroe. The memory of her name, her face, came rushing back. Sarah Monroe had been the woman who had believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. I had walked away from her, convinced that the path to success was something I had to take alone. But now, the ghost of her presence was pulling at me, forcing me to confront the decisions I had made, the person I had become. Mark continued. I checked out her background. She's doing well. A small community. No records of any scandals or anything untoward. It's all pretty quiet. Emma, though, she's 7 years old, lives with Sarah, and has no trace of a father figure in her life. I sat there in stunned silence. trying to process the weight of what I was hearing. Was I really the father of that little girl? My mind reeled, and for the first time, I began to question the choices I had made all those years ago. I had walked away from the person who had once stood by me. And now I was facing the consequences of my own pride. Where is Sarah now? I asked, my voice tight with emotion. She's running the bookstore still. A small shop. A quiet life. Mark replied. No one seems to be looking for drama. Just a woman trying to make a living and raise her daughter. I rubbed my temples, 1,000 thoughts crashing through my mind. Find out more. I need to know where they are. Where Sarah is now. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. My mind racing. My story had always been about the rise from nothing. About how hard I had worked to build something that was entirely mine. But now, the questions that lingered were no longer about the numbers or the brand. They were about a woman I had once loved and the child I had never known. The people I had left behind were still here. In my life, waiting for me to acknowledge them. I stood up, pacing around the office. The walls felt oppressive now, closing in with the weight of the decisions I had made. I had always thought that the past was something to be left behind. That success was the only thing worth pursuing. But in the quiet corners of my mind, I began to hear Emma's voice again, calling out the part of my story I had so carefully erased. You forgot her. And this time, I wasn't sure I could keep pretending I didn't hear her. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't seem to focus on anything. I spent hours in my office, poring over numbers and projections. Yet my mind kept drifting back to Emma and Sarah. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my life, my story, was not just about success. It had been about control over my image, my future, the narrative I wanted the world to see. But now, as the silence of my office pressed in, I began to wonder if that narrative was incomplete. If it lacked something more fundamental, the truth. The truth about Sarah. The truth about Emma. Mark had done his part. He'd tracked Sarah down to a small bookstore, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the buzz of city life. I had been avoiding the call, uncertain about what to do with this new information. But I knew I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had a part of my past. A part of my soul that I had buried too deep to even remember. I had always told myself that I needed to leave the past behind to move forward. But now, it felt as if the past was calling me back, demanding to be acknowledged. It wasn't until I found myself standing outside that small bookstore, its quaint charm and faded sign barely noticeable against the backdrop of the modern city, that I realized just how far I had fallen. I had spent so many years building a facade, an empire of success, all while leaving the people who had believed in me the most behind. And now, here I was, on the verge of stepping into a world I had long abandoned. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside. The smell of old paper and vanilla filled the air, an immediate contrast to the sterile, high-end world I had grown accustomed to. It was warm, intimate, and for some reason, it felt like home, like something I had once known but lost along the way. I saw her immediately. Sarah. She was standing behind the counter, flipping through a thick hardcover book. Her hair was pinned up in a messy bun, a few strands slipping loose as she focused intently on the pages. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down, and all the years between us melted away. But as if sensing me, she looked up, her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw everything I had left behind, the love, the pain, the choices. Her face was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze that spoke volumes. She hadn't changed much, the same quiet intensity, the same strength that had drawn me to her all those years ago. But now, as I stood before her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something vital, something important that I was only now beginning to understand. Well, she said, her voice calm but sharp. I can't say I had this on my bingo card. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Sarah, I said softly, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. I ran into Emma the other day. She nodded, acknowledging the unspoken tension between us. Lily's got a habit of making first impressions. she said, her voice softening. She doesn't hold back. I smiled. Despite myself. She certainly doesn't. Sarah's expression shifted, just slightly, as she set the book down. You never should have walked away, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. The words hit me harder than I expected. More painful than anything I had felt in years. I had built my life on the belief that success would validate every decision. That ambition was worth every sacrifice. But in that moment, I realized just how much I had given up, how much I had lost. I didn't know what to do. I admitted, my voice raw. I thought I had to leave everything behind. I thought success was the only thing that mattered. Sarah studied me for a moment. And then she spoke again. Her tone steady but firm. Sometimes, success isn't about what you build, William. It's about who you build it with. You left us. And maybe it's too late to fix that. But maybe, just maybe, you can try. Her words stung. But they were also the truth. I had spent so many years convinced that the past was something to be forgotten. But Sarah was right. It wasn't about success or money. It was about the people who had been there all along. The ones who had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I sat in silence for a long time. The weight of everything pressing down on me. Where is she now? I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a notepad behind the counter and scribbled something down. She tore the page off and slid it toward me. If you want to find the answers, you need to ask Emma herself, she said. I hesitated for a moment before I took the paper. The address was simple, unremarkable, but it felt like a lifeline. A thread leading me back to something I had left behind. I stood up, feeling a quiet resolve settle in my chest. I'll go, I said, my voice firm. Sarah gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. Good luck, William. I nodded, but as I walked out of the bookstore, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step into a world that had been waiting for me all along. A world I had been too blind to see. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Days passed, and the journey I had started with that simple, unexpected encounter with Emma began to feel like a turning point. I had spent so long building an image of myself, creating a story that was polished and perfect. But in the process, I had neglected the parts of my life that truly mattered. The love I had once shared with Sarah. The truth about what I had walked away from. All of it had been hidden beneath layers of ambition and pride. But as I stood at the bookstore, holding Emma's crayon-scribbled version of my story, I realized that the truth could never be erased. Life wasn't about having a flawless narrative. It was about the messy parts. The mistakes. The people who loved you even when you didn't deserve it. Emma and Sarah had reminded me of that. I had spent so many years focused on what I thought mattered. But now, I understood that what really mattered was who I was with. And how we chose to write our stories together. I couldn't change the past. But I could rewrite the future. I had to make things right. Not just for myself, but for Emma, for Sarah, and for the version of myself I had left behind. The world had always been obsessed with success. With winning. With perfection. But now, I saw it differently. True success was about embracing the parts of yourself that you had neglected. The parts that made you whole. So, I walked back into my life. This time not as a man obsessed with control, but as someone ready to share his story. A story that was real. Messy. And full of love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories like this. See you in the next one.